Minds touching minds. Telepathy is an experience many say they've had. But is there any proof that it exists? These twins say they talk to each other without words. A mother claims telepathy saved her twin child's life. This man says he spied on secret military bases on the other side of the world in his mind. Is it coincidence, or is there compelling evidence that telepathy exists? Our investigation begins with a test of two minds that work as one. Sporting different hairstyles, these twin brothers are otherwise identical. Black belt karate experts Neil and Adrian Raymond starred in the action thriller Matrix Unloaded. Two brothers blessed with a special bond.
Something's happening, there is a connection there, an unspoken connection. So what is that unspoken connection?
With telepathy, you have the idea of mind-to-mind contact, that people are communicating with one another over and above the normal known channels.
A striking example of this connection came when the twins were in their teens. Adrian fell suddenly and inexplicably ill whilst on an adventure camp far from home and twin brother Neil.
At this time, unbeknown to me, my identical twin, my mirror twin, was back in southeast England in hospital.
I mean, that's exactly what happened. I mean, I had this acute appendicitis, rushed to hospital, felt the pain, and he, at the same time, felt the pain as well.
After he had his appendicitis out, the pain disappeared totally, just dissipated, and there was me left in hospital crying wolf.
Possibly a coincidence, possibly not.
But
Sorry.
that was weird.
Identical stories are told by identical twins around the world. Lisa and Debbie Gantz now live in New York, but when Lisa was traveling in Australia, she suffered a serious car crash. Her identical twin says she felt immediate alarm and pain for her twin, thousands of kilometers away in New York.
I never had such an intense feeling of somewhat like pain, but it wasn't my pain. It was her pain, so I couldn't verbalize it, so it must have been my sister.
It's a perfect example of when you call it, you have a sixth sense.
Even if we're not together, the experiences are shared through a connection that we can't explain.
So when Debbie goes out on a date and has a good time, then I just stay home and feel it.
Oh, that's really nice.
Such intriguing instances of alleged telepathy are put to the test by British psychologist Professor Richard Wiseman. He runs a special laboratory at the University of Hertfordshire, north of London.
You can't say there's no evidence for it at all. People do have unusual experiences. Some of the experiments have turned up some very unusual results. The question is, do you find it compelling? Is there enough evidence to say, yes, I'm fairly certain there's something unusual going on? And for me, that evidence simply isn't there.
Yet seemingly inexplicable stories of twin telepathy are told all over the world.
It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We were asleep. I got up to use the restroom, and I ended up fainting. I hit my eye, and I probably was unconscious for about 20 minutes. And so I was knocked out asleep. And then when I was sleeping, all of a sudden I heard, Leisha, Leisha, Leisha. So I got up and I went to the bathroom, and I found her laying there on the ground, and she had split her eye open really bad. So I woke her up, took her to the emergency room, but it was kind of amazing because I just knew something was wrong with her.
I started telling her this dream, and about midway through it, she started finishing it. I had the exact same dream. The only difference is it was reversed roles.
I got in a really, really major car accident, going 80 miles an hour on the freeway. I had a stopped car, and she knew right away that something was wrong. What's wrong?
I actually felt pain here, and she broke
my sternum, and she felt pain in her chest.
Strange experiences, but could they be put down to coincidence or some other rational explanation? Twin telepathy is about to be put to the test, with Matrix Reloaded stars Adrian and Neil Raymond. Although they're not convinced about telepathy,
I think it's something that you can't test. What are the tests?
What we're going to do is the tie experiment. So what we're going to do is lay out some ties, the same ties for each of you. I'm going to ask you just to simply choose one of the ties, put it on. We're going to be looking to see whether you choose the same tie.
in the simple tie test, the twins are asked to choose a tie at exactly the same time, without seeing what the other brother has selected. In this way, psychologist and paranormal skeptic Professor Richard Wiseman is trying to see if the twins instinctively choose the same styles. The result? One may doubt whether these twins are even related.
Brilliant.
3-0 and counting.
After 6 tries, not one match.
Dude, you and me are linked.
The boys are then asked to choose again, but this time they've got to try and read each other's choice and match what the other is wearing. Intriguingly, there's an instant result.
You can turn around and face one another.
We have a winner!
Scientifically, the experiment is as crude as some of the color combinations the twins put together.
That's confirmed it. 1 out of 8. What does that say?
Oh, we're on a roll now.
Something more sophisticated is required to put telepathy to the test. Another, more structured experiment will examine an apparent link between another set of twins. One will be wired up to record vital signs.
Like that.
The other will be blindfolded and subjected to a series of shocks. What will be recorded is interesting, but what does it mean? And is it evidence of real telepathy? When examining the notion of telepathy, can fact be separated from fiction? So far, the most intriguing tales heard are from identical twins, but there's no hard evidence that their experiences are paranormal. Our next test subjects are 9-year-old Richard and Damien Powles. According to their mum, the twins have shown signs of telepathy almost from the moment they were born. In fact, Anna Powles thinks telepathy saved Damien's life.
The first occasion was when they were 3 days old. I was feeding them both on my bed, and I put Damien to the side of me and settled him there while changing Richard. Richard started to cry, and then he started to scream. It looked like he was having a convulsion. His whole body started to shake. Then I did suddenly think, twins relay messages to each other, and as I looked down to make sure, he wasn't there. He'd rolled behind me into the other pillows, practically suffocated. He'd stopped breathing and his face was blue, and I had to give him mouth to mouth, resuscitate him. But if it hadn't been for Richard, I believe to this day Damien would be dead.
Richard and Damien Powles share more than just the same grades at school. Their mum thinks they may share each other's aches and pains.
When they were 3, Damien was complaining about his knee was aching, and it turned out to be Richard had a knee infection. The other major one was that Richard had really bad pains in his back and was crying with the pain, and it was Damien who had a shrunken kidney that they've discovered since.
The twins are going to be monitored for signs of telepathic communication. First, the boys will be separated to avoid physical communication. Then Damien will be subjected to a series of shocks to see if his twin reacts.
Polygraph now.
Richard is connected to a polygraph machine by Guy Heseltine, a certified member of a professional organization. A polygraph detects physiological changes to the body that are invisible to the eye and charts these changes as they happen.
This one's going to go around your stomach. We're going to connect it.
Separate belts at the top and bottom of the chest record changes in breathing. Results appear on the 2 blue lines at the top of the screen. Electrodes measure conductivity on the surface of the skin, recorded in green on the monitor. An armband measures pulse rate and also records any changes in blood pressure, the red line on the screen.
That's your mum's.
Finally, Richard wears headphones to ensure that he doesn't hear what's taking place in the house during the trial. Downstairs, Damien concentrates on his absent twin by drawing his picture.
He's a bit bored at the moment, isn't he?
Yes.
First, Damien is startled. Is it possible his reaction will be registered by his twin?
Just after the plates were dropped, it appears that there's an increase in the cardio activity, followed very closely by an increase in the skin resistance, which could well be significant.
Upstairs, Richard relaxes as Damien takes a second test.
Right, Damien, I'm going to put your hand in this jar.
Blindfolded, he expects to find sweets in a jar.
Find it for me.
But the jar is filled with ice-cold water, provoking a predictable shock reaction.
Oh, it's gone.
Richard appears unaffected, but moments later, the polygraph chart reveals a deep breath. Blood pressure and pulse readings also show sudden changes.
During the test, the child here was caused to have quite a significant movement, also in line with a deep breath, which may well be significant to what was going on downstairs.
Finally, Damien is startled by a balloon being burst. At that moment, the polygraph records changes in twin Richard's vital signs.
Over all 3 experiments, there's some kind of reaction that the child has experienced up here on each of the 3 tests. It could be construed that those reactions are as a result of some kind of activity downstairs.
Damien's reactions appear to provoke a subconscious reaction in Richard. But can we draw any conclusions about telepathy from the test? Probably not. For one thing, some question using a polygraph to test for telepathy. The polygraph charts body functions, but these may not tell us what's really going on in the brain. And then there's the question of just how physically separate the twins truly were. They were apart, but perhaps not perfectly isolated. The demonstration took place in an old house. Richard was in an upstairs room behind 2 closed doors, 2 flights of stairs up from his brother. But could he have heard something or have felt vibrations from downstairs? Clearly, these are not laboratory conditions. The results are also open to interpretation. The experimenter can highlight favorable feedback and overlook other results that don't fit. The human mind is proving a formidable and notoriously difficult subject in the search for telepathic evidence. Psychology professor Richard Wiseman will attempt another experiment in his laboratory at Hertfordshire University. His subjects, actors and identical twins Neil and Adrian Raymond, return for another test of the unspoken communication they claim to share. But is it telepathy? Using classic ESP or Zener cards, the twins are asked to select one distinctive symbol each at the same time. Unable to see what the other is doing, they will attempt to communicate their choices to each other and pick the same card. The results? Utterly predictable.
And you can see the majority of them are misses. So we have 8 hits, which are over that side of the table, which is exactly on chance. That's precisely what we'd expect by chance. So
statistically, we did prove something correct.
You proved that the statistics are correct, yeah.
Of 40 possible matches, the twins made only 8, exactly what one would expect by chance.
The twins have been in the same room and you think they might be able to pick up subtle signals from one another and so on. And if you get an impressive result, then you tighten up on the controls. We haven't had those impressive results. There's no reason to then run ever more rigorous experiments. So we haven't seen exactly compelling evidence of telepathy between our twins.
Chance? Coincidence? Or are there really people who can see through walls, across rooms and even continents with their minds? ESP agents who can telepathically spy on their enemies? In San Francisco, one man claims to have telepathic powers over great distances and with people he's never even met. He's even served as a spy, using only his mind. All he requires for mind-to-mind contact is the sender's photograph.
It's like a path.
To put this extraordinary claim to the test, a complete stranger, TV researcher Rachel Curran, will be placed in a random location on her first ever visit to the Bay Area of San Francisco. Without meeting her, ex-telepathy spy Joe McMoneagle will try to make contact with her mind from an office many kilometers away. Then, in a process known as remote viewing, he'll try to see what she sees. Curran chooses 6 possible locations and photographs them. There's a marina, a quarry, Dumbarton Bridge, the municipal airport, a university football stadium, and a giant redwood tree. The photos of each location are put into 6 sets of envelopes and handed to a lawyer for safekeeping. He'll select one set of photos at random with a throw of a die. This random selection ensures that neither person in the experiment can influence choice.
See what envelope to pick. Well, this is the one we chose. Welcome.
Until she opens the envelope, researcher Rachel Curran has no idea which location has been chosen. This ensures that she can't give anything away. As Rachel Curran arrives at the location, Joe McMoneagle will try to describe what Rachel is seeing by telepathy. He works from the city offices of a former colleague and one-time director of America's psychic spy program. Neither man has any idea who our researcher is or where she's going.
By 10:30 this morning, our target person named Rachel is at the site. And my question is, do you know her or have you ever met her in the past?
No, I haven't.
Joe McMoneagle will now try to connect telepathically with Rachel Curran, a stranger he's never met. She will try to act as a beacon, allowing him to see through her mind.
She is somewhere in the Bay Area of California, and what I'd like you to do now is just describe the surroundings in which she finds herself now.
Okay. Kind of a half arch. There's something dark about it. Like there's something kind of darkness.
Joe McMoneagle sets himself a 30-minute deadline to describe Rachel Curran's surroundings. We'll see how accurate he proves to be. Meanwhile, another researcher is trying to put telepathy and remote viewing to scientific scrutiny. A woman tries to open her mind to receive video images from a colleague in a sealed room, many meters away. Could this experiment offer any evidence to show whether telepathy exists? A visit to the University of Edinburgh can uncover more. Here, scientists are working on a version of an experiment known as the Ganzfeld test. It requires a volunteer to be deeply relaxed and almost asleep. Conducting this experiment is Dr. Paul Stevens. Stevens has worked at the university's parapsychology unit for almost a decade, studying ESP and psychokinesis. While many doubt these subjects can deliver reliable results, Stevens is trying to prove otherwise in a series of pioneering experiments.
Headphones. It's like a very mild sensory deprivation. You have a low-level red light, you're in a comfy chair, you listen to the hissing white noise sound. White noise is a uniform blend of all the different frequencies. When you listen to it, it sounds mostly like sort of radio static, or maybe a distant waterfall is a more poetic image. The idea is to get you to a state just as you're about to fall asleep. Your brain's very good at looking for patterns, so if you give it something that has no patterns in it, eventually it'll tune it out. What we're doing here is more like daydreaming rather than sleep dreaming.
Some 25 meters away, another volunteer, the sender, enters a sealed room and prepares to transmit mental messages. A computer randomly selects a short clip of video and plays it over and over again. The sender's job is to transmit those images to the receiver. At first, the receiver's answers stray far from the mark. No telepathy here.
Running water into a pond. A lake thing. Sounds make me think of the TV when it's not working. In my flat in my living room. Lying on the sofa with a blanket over me.
It might just be chance, but gradually the receiver appears to focus in on the video's street images.
On a street with lots of cars and rain on an umbrella. I'm walking along a street, past a pub with cars going by. I see a red car now. Feet are going heavy, really heavy. Vague feeling of cars and a tank. Arms are clenched, clenched fists. Getting a blue car now, and the horns are beeping. Getting a black impression with red houses in the background.
The receiver's descriptions are intriguing, but there's more going on. Throughout the experiment, the sender has been hearing the receiver's voice describing what she's visualizing.
I think I'm seeing yellow lights. Getting a blue car now, and the horns are beeping. Getting a black impression with red houses in the background.
When the description appears to match the video scene, the sender tries to transmit a telepathic burst of positive thoughts to her partner. Each time she does this, she pushes an electronic key. The key records the exact moment those positive thoughts go out. The receiver, meanwhile, has electrodes attached to her fingers. They detect any changes in the electrical conductivity of her skin. Sometimes, just when the sender hits the button, the receiver does seem to show a reaction. But is it a reaction to the sender's positive thoughts? The results are far from conclusive, but Stevens thinks there might be something there.
It's a very small effect, but when you add it up all over all the people, over all the series, it does seem to be significant, and we can't find any other reason for it to be there other than there's some kind of signalling going on.
But can Stevens convince the skeptics? In experiments like these, believers in telepathy find positive results, but others who doubt the paranormal see nothing out of the ordinary. After 56 experiments, Stevens has recorded indications that receivers do respond after positive thoughts from another person. When his results are published, Stevens thinks he'll prove his point. But many other experiments and studies have left the skeptics unimpressed, especially about claims that people can mentally transmit pictures or locations.
There are some scientists that think there's sufficient evidence to conclude that remote viewing exists. I've looked at some of that work, I've carried out critiques of it, I'm not convinced. I think some of the studies were fairly sloppy, lots of the time there's room for error. So I don't think the evidence is compelling.
Back in Northern California, former ESP spy Joe McMoneagle is attempting to prove his telepathic talents. He's trying to make mind contact with a complete stranger sent to a secret location, TV researcher Rachel Curran. As he does this, he claims to be able to see through her eyes, and to prove it, he's making a sketch he hopes will match the surroundings of the secret place.
Through a tunnel or something, or under an overpass, like a walkway of some kind under an overpass. And then there's kind of an abutment, just like a high overhang. This is way up over her head.
From time to time, a former colleague keeps Joe McMoneagle focused on Rachel Curran by showing him her picture. She's trying to act as a beacon, transmitting what she can see to the receiver.
We have a garden. It's a formal garden. Formal garden's got paths, open area in the center, with trees. And there's some kind of a artwork, some kind in the center. But this artwork is very bizarre. Set in gravel, stone.
McMoneagle lists features he believes will be found at Curran's secret location. He concentrates hard for nearly half an hour. Finally, he says he's received some images, but how accurate will they prove to be?
You bet.
In an attempt to prove that telepathy exists, a man who claims to be able to see through the minds of people he's never even met is about to see the results of a psychic test. Joe McMoneagle is on his way to meet a stranger who was sent to a mystery location. By reading her mind, he supposedly sketched the exact location. The approach to the location runs through an underpass.
Right there. That's exactly what I was getting.
After a promising start, Joe McMoneagle believes he got many details about the mystery location correct and looks to his drawings for other features gleaned by his telepathic powers. He finally meets the stranger with whom he apparently had mind-to-mind contact.
Lovely to meet you, Joe.
By merely concentrating on her photograph, he claims to have recorded the details she was seeing at the time.
At 10:30 a.m., I started off with a half arch. I said it was a passage that went into an area that was curved on one side, and I had a tunneling effect. Very dark on the right-hand side. This is a way into wherever you were going.
Yes.
I had big, heavy material with a high overhang. I said it was like a bridge overhang or an abutment of some kind. Took a break here.
But initially, there was no mention or clear indication of the main overwhelming feature, Dumbarton Bridge. Once again, the skeptics are not convinced.
What you have is someone saying, well, look, I made this drawing, or I came up with these ideas, and when you looked at the target, look, there are correspondences. If you're very creative, you're pretty good at seeing correspondences between a fairly ambiguous drawing and a fairly complex target out in the real world. So you can't really assess the evidence in that way. You need to carry out experiments.
But according to Joe McMoneagle, his telepathic powers have been tried and tested, not just across cities, but across the world. His brain was harnessed by the American government to peer into the minds of the enemy. He played a key role in a once top-secret project dubbed Stargate. Joe McMoneagle says he and his colleagues pinpointed hidden military bases on the other side of the world. He claims to have discovered his skills about 25 years ago. At the time, the intelligence community was seeking ways to harness telepathy to win the Cold War. November the 4th, 1979, the hostage crisis in Iran. The start of a 444-day nightmare for a US administration desperate to bring the hostages home alive. The government is apparently willing to try everything, including agents who claim to have telepathic powers. Continents away from Iran, this inconspicuous hut at Fort Meade, Maryland, housed the top-secret project known as Stargate. It employed people who believed they could sense events thousands of miles away. The CIA termed their ability remote viewing. Joe McMoneagle says he worked for a year as a remote viewer on the hostage crisis.
They called us in and presented us with literally hundreds of photographs and asked us to try to identify who the actual hostages were.
He says the remote viewers tried to gather more information on the hostages and their situation.
Doing everything from targeting the condition of the hostages to trying to discover which rooms hostages were being held in, their medical condition, who the hostage takers were, how they were armed, what kind of weaponry was being used.
He claims that the team's descriptions were corroborated and that remote viewing by telepathy peered into the secrets of America's Cold War enemies. The remote viewing team worked for more than 2 decades. The unit was formed after the CIA heard of early telepathic experiments conducted by quantum physicist Hal Puthoff.
Suddenly, these people from the CIA came by and they said, "Well, have we been looking for you?" And I said, "Well, why is that?" He said, "Well, we've been investigating the rumors and the data that the Soviet Union has been involved in serious psychic research for well over a decade, spending lots of money. We have no way to evaluate this data. So we've been looking for an investigator that might look into this for us." I'm a physicist, a quantum physicist, and so the idea that there may be some aspect of scientific theory involving consciousness that had not yet made it into our physics lexicon, that was a challenge to me and an interest to me as a physicist.
Puthoff assembled a team to begin telepathy and remote viewing experiments for the CIA at Stanford Research Institute.
And our particular activity took place in a secure building located here, the radiophysics laboratory, and that's where most of our research took place.
Former remote viewers report that they tried to concentrate on another human mind, known by them as the Beacon, at the target location.
It's like you've got a door between you and the scene. And it's like you poke a small hole through the door and you get a little glimpse, then you poke another hole through the door, and you get a little glimpse. Each hole is like a subliminal perception experiment. You view something quickly. You just keep poking, and eventually the door finally has enough holes in it that it kind of crumbles, and you get a pretty good view of the scene.
We don't know actually what's involved in the transmittal of the information in the beacon targets. There could be telepathy involved, where there's mind-to-mind communication between the person who's acting as the beacon and the remote viewer.
Obviously, this would require someone at the target site to act as a telepathic beacon. Difficult to get away with, perhaps agents were unwilling to risk their lives for this purpose. The remote viewers came up with an unlikely alternative. They dispensed with the use of human beacons altogether. Instead, they simply concentrated on the location's map coordinates. It was a bizarre shift, but the remote viewers still believed they were getting results.
Making the jump from beacon to geographical coordinates is, you might say at the psychological level, an impossible jump. But our program was completely empirically driven. So if we saw a result, it didn't matter, we couldn't explain it, we had no idea how it worked. If we saw a result, we followed the data wherever it took us.
Viewers were ordered to target a Soviet facility at Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. Puthoff claims the results were remarkable.
We carried out a remote viewing experiment over an hour or so, describing the layout of a facility, and finally ending up saying that the most striking feature of this site was a very large crane that rolled over atop of a building. In fact, the crane was so large that a man would only be half a wheel height. This is what, in fact, the site looks like. He was correct. There was a very large crane. It did roll over the top of a building.
But since the Semipalatinsk viewing was made public, the alleged findings have been criticized as inaccurate. But for Joe McMoneagle, telepathy is real and profitable. He runs a business hiring his remote viewing services out to commercial companies.
Picture the following image. It's sort of like someone blindfolding you so that you're in a totally inky black place where you can't see your hand in front of your face. It's so black, and at some point a flashbulb goes off, and it's absolutely brilliant. And you see an entire room filled with stuff. And you're in that inky black space again. And somebody's asking you, quick, tell me where you are. Can you explain it scientifically? No, I don't think we're there yet.
Even if there is no explanation, Joe McMoneagle claims the proof lays in one of his greatest Cold War successes. The National Security Council wanted to know more about what was happening inside a huge new building in the north of the Soviet Union.
I was asked to describe what was going on under the roof of this building. And the image I had was of two very large cylinders being welded together. I saw canted missile tubes. I saw a unique drive system. And all of this was taking place next to a standard-sized submarine, which I found to be dwarfed next to the size of this one that was under construction. It was absolutely huge. The size, I guess, is being almost twice the size of a standard submarine.
He says he's the one who worked out that the building was in fact a submarine factory, even though it was half a mile from the sea with no waterway. The proof came a few months later.
About 100 days later, big bulldozers showed up and started cutting a canal to the sea. And they launched the largest submarine in the world, which was the Typhoon-class submarine. They call it the beaver tail because it's so huge and wide in the rear. I actually was awarded a Legion of Merit, one of the highest peacetime awards that can be given in the military. And I received the Legion of Merit predominantly for my remote viewing. And
does this mean that telepathy was officially recognized? Or was there an ulterior motive for the American government to publicly reward an alleged ESP spy?
The notion of telepathy could act as a very interesting scapegoat to conceal some other way of genuinely getting information. So if you have a new satellite system and that's giving you great information about the enemy, well, you don't want to tip that that's the system that you're using to get that information. So what do you tell the enemy? We've got these great psychic spies. And suddenly you have a way of covering your tracks.
However the Stargate psychics served their country, they did not foresee their own demise as the result of a critical CIA report. The report concluded that there was no evidence that remote viewing was operationally useful, and that there was no proof that it gathered military intelligence effectively. The remote viewing program was shut down. Yet since Project Stargate was terminated, researchers have continued to explore the notion of telepathy. Some now believe they have found evidence indicating which part of the brain is stimulated during telepathy. Probing the nerve centers of the brain, scientists have produced intriguing results. The The average human brain has 100 billion neurons. It is capable of storing memories of places, people, sensations, and thoughts for a lifetime. But can it transmit those thoughts by telepathy? If telepathy does exist, what can the brain reveal about it? The Bastyr University near Seattle, Washington, is dedicated to the study of natural medicine and alternative health. Researchers here are attempting to measure what is going on in the brains of people trying to communicate by telepathy. In this case, their mother and daughter. The experiment starts by placing each in a separate and secure room. Each is fitted to a machine that measures electromagnetic brain waves. It's basically a cap with electrodes that register activity on various parts of the skull.
So now we're going to place the ear electrodes.
Mother Jorga, the sender, will attempt to relay telepathic signals to her daughter Ingrid, the receiver, in the next room. Conducting gel is squirted onto the scalp so electrodes can pick up signals from the brain. Before the experiment starts, both Jorga and Ingrid are induced into a relaxed state through meditation. Researchers believe this gets the brain into the so-called alpha state, where the subject is relaxed and reflective. Acting as the sender, the mother in the next room receives a simple visual stimulus to her brain, a checkered pattern that suddenly changes. The tiny blip on the lower lines of the graph represents the moment when the checker pattern changes. 100 milliseconds later, the daughter's brain in the room next door appears to show activity. It could be her response to the checkerboard movement next door. The visual stimulation of the mother's brain seems to have provoked a reaction in her daughter's brain waves. These two events could be related, but on the other hand, it might be down to plain and boring coincidence. After repeated tests, statistical analysis indicates that for a few people, the effect may be more than chance. Scientists are accepting the possibility that some receivers' brains inexplicably react to another unconnected mind 30 feet away. Research associate Professor Clark Johnson says the result has changed his ideas.
I've been one of our major skeptics here in this group. We'll get results and I just say, that just can't be right. Let's keep looking here. And I've run out of ways of convincing myself that we've made any mistakes. I can't find any right now.
The experiment is repeated, this time with the receiver inside an MRI scanner. The image of brain activity suggests that this area at the back of the brain, the visual input register, is being stimulated. It's either coincidence or groundbreaking evidence that one person is reacting to telepathic signals from another. The human mind is a complex and confounding subject for investigation. The notion of telepathy, mind-to-mind communication, remains controversial. Twins tell amazing tales of shared feelings even when they're distances apart. It could be telepathy or just extreme familiarity.
I think it, broadly speaking, is communication, just in some sort of, as I say, unspoken form.
Psychologist Professor Richard Wiseman put identical twins Neil and Adrian Raymond to the test. First, a simple task to see whether they would pick the same tie at the same time. Unconvinced about telepathy at the start, the results did little to change the twins' opinions.
Dude, you and me are linked.
Of 8 possible matches, the brothers made just one. Then there was the classic ESP card test. Selecting individual cards, they attempted to read each other's minds to see what card the other selected and match that selection. They had 40 tries, but of 40 possible matches, scored an exact chance average of 8.
You might have thought, well, just because they think in the same way, you'd have got some matches and the ties or the cards they chose or whatever. And we haven't seen that.
For the twins, the tests were not relevant to the special relationship they enjoy. They believe the unspoken communication they share is a natural result of growing up together.
I did feel a little bit of performance anxiety to achieve some extraordinary telepathy result.
We hit the dead normality.
Yeah.
The dead percentage for normality.
We are normal.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's debatable, really.
It is.
But that's another question.
Another question is the validity of the experiments we've seen and whether they've produced reliable evidence. Rewinding back to the test for remote viewing, and the man who claims he can see hidden places through the minds of strangers.
That's exactly what I was seeing right there. That's exactly what I was getting.
The mystery location was a bridge, but self-professed remote viewer Joe McMonagle's drawing included vague and general features that skeptics say could be attributed to anything. He failed to mention or identify the actual target itself, Dumbarton Bridge. Remote viewing appears to be a game of chance.
See what envelope to pick.
Common sense raises other concerns. The stranger, supposedly acting as a sender, probably did not truly select her target at random. Perhaps another person would pick sites not unique to the area, like a parking lot or a church. And as has been pointed out, perhaps Joe McMonagle gets results by drawing general pictures that could refer to anything. Despite extravagant claims, telepathy could be no more than a shot in the dark. There are many tales of apparent telepathy between twins. Testing this notion is another matter. These twin boys could have responded to each other. Fascinating, but inconclusive. Young women were studied under laboratory conditions,
On a street with lots of cars.
but scientists can't agree whether the reactions measured are significant or coincidental. As we've seen, the ex-intelligence agent challenged to remotely sense a secret location failed to provide a convincing result. Mother and daughter, their brains appeared to respond within milliseconds. Intriguing, but not enough to prove or disprove anything.
It's impossible to disprove the notion of telepathy. If I ran 100 experiments and they're all dead at chance, no evidence at all, a believer can say, well, you haven't quite tested the right people or in quite the right way. So I run another 100, same results. Well, you still need to do some more because maybe it only happens on Wednesday afternoon or whatever. So you can never disprove telepathy.
And while some evidence may appear to be significant, it's most likely to be nothing more than coincidence. Even if it was accepted, no one can explain how it works or why. Until there is incontrovertible proof, telepathy must remain on the fringes. Fascinating, yes, but a real science, no.